Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jane Golding, Chair of the Community Archives and Heritage Group. I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar. Thank you very much for joining. We have, I think, 100 people signed up, so it's really great to be sharing, connecting with you all this afternoon. I'd like to thank everyone who's made this webinar possible, both today and behind the scenes. This is a new way of working for us, so we're learning as we go along. So this session includes several elements that would have been part of our annual conference. Pre-pandemic, we were planning to hold this at University College London in July, but the theme was intended to be heritage and wellbeing. So we're delighted that we'll be able to bring to you today a special co-presentation from the National Lottery Heritage Fund and the Restoration Trust. We'll shortly be hearing from our speakers, Liz, Laura and Richard. But first we're going to start with a very brief, and it will be brief, AGM. And then we'll go on to the exciting business of announcing our award winners for 2020. And then we'll conclude the webinar with hearing from our overall winning group, who we will be awarding the great title of Community Archive of the Year 2020. And a huge thank you to all the groups that have entered. We wish we could give everyone an award. And so in addition to the 4 winners that we're announcing this afternoon, there are another 2 groups that we feel deserve special mention. And we've asked them to talk at one of our webinars within this series. And the winning groups have been sworn to secrecy. They've not been able to share their success yet. So all that's going to change in a moment. But first, I'd just like to thank you for your patience and for your help in putting together today's presentation. So we've got a lot to cover this afternoon, and the timing is going to be tight. But if possible, we will take a short break after the keynote presentation, but we'll have to see how the timing goes on that. So I better quickly move on to the AGM. The AGM consists of 2 reports, report from the chair and a report from the treasurer, and that's followed by the election of the committee. So there's no papers, and a report of today's proceedings will be available on the website as part of this recording. So I'm just going to share my screen with you now. So I'd like to thank my fellow committee members for all the hard work over the year, and it's been a real pleasure to work with you all. And of course, this has been no ordinary year. These are difficult times, and we're living through challenges that have particular resonance, both for the meaning of and importance of community. So my reflection for 2020, sorry, I'm just trying to move on to the next screen. There we go, sorry. Is about adapting to change, to new circumstances and seeking new opportunities. The awards and the annual conference are always a highlight of our year, so we're pleased that we have been able to still continue with these, although in a different format. So I won't say much more about those because we're going to be hearing about the awards shortly, but I wanted to tell you about our regional networks. This is, we've just launched these this year as pilot projects, and each network is being funded for 2 years by the Archives and Record Association. So we have one in Scotland and we have one in the Southwest. And our aim is to extend Cartridge's reach directly to groups in each of these areas to create opportunities for building confidence, skills and support between the groups. And then when the projects report, we will be looking to replicate this approach elsewhere across the country, and of course work with networks that are already in existence. And you can hear more about these in our webinar in November. And so we're all having to find new ways of keeping in touch and staying connected through the current difficulties. So we asked groups to tell us about how they're adapting to the pandemic, and you came back with lots of ways of new learning initiatives and ways of doing things differently, all coming out of the current situation. And we've shared these ideas via our e-newsletter, along with a host of other resources from across the sector to help groups remain staying connected and remain sustainable. And then for ARC magazine, we were delighted to receive an invitation to assemble a community archives issue of ARC, the monthly magazine of the Archives and Record Association. And so this is an appropriate point for me to thank ARA for their continued support and funding of our group. I should just say for the conference next year, we are still hoping that we can go back to University College London, but these are still uncertain times. So we will be looking whether we make a decision to have a virtual conference again next year. And we've been exploring ways how we can extend our capacity to do a much larger event. So look out for that. And then looking forward to next year, I've listed the main areas of challenge and opportunity that we'll be focusing over the year. And in each of these areas, we'll be asking, what can we do differently to create more value for more people? I haven't got time to talk through each of those, but I just want to say two particular points. Within digital engagement, we want to work collaboratively to partner CARD networks and audience knowledge with existing skills development and build capacity. And so Nick in a moment will be telling you more how we're going to revise our budget to align with this and other priorities. But we've already started in this direction. And in our December webinar, we're having a look at online digital preservation training with Sharon Meekham from the Digital Preservation Coalition. And this session was delivered to our Scottish network earlier last month with great success. And also do look out for CARD being more active on social media. We're exploring ways how we can resource this important activity and increase our efforts to share and retweet and connect groups to make CARD a real network. And then the second point I just wanted to make is that community archives sector is rich in diversity. However, we're painfully aware that such diversity is not reflected in the makeup of the committee. And therefore we're missing out on serving groups, all groups equally well. So if you'd like to bring new perspectives to the committee and help us grow, please do consider joining us. The contact details are in the Padlet that was shared with your viewing instructions. So I'm now going to hand over to Nick Barrett, our treasurer, who's going to explain how we're revising our budget profile to take account of the current circumstances and how we can focus our resources in areas where we can most make a difference.
Thanks, Jane.
Over to Nick.
That's really kind, appreciate it. I'm just going to share my screen, mainly because I couldn't resist the urge to put some slides together that show our financial position. Let's just get that up now. Hopefully you can see that. And let's run it from the slideshow. Okay, so this is our budget to date for 1920, the year that's just gone, that's under report at the moment. You can see we've split it down into various areas: committee expenses, the awards which support the activities that we're going to be celebrating later, the conference, regional activities, the way that we develop our websites, and various other bits and pieces. And as you can see, just with the headline figures there, we were underspent by 4,600. So our money is solvent in that sense. We're solvent, but there are some areas where I think we can just think a little bit more about how we, as Jane has said, promote new activities. So, for example, just pulling out a couple of figures here, and I will be brief, there is some expenditure for the 1920 awards that will come into the 2021 year. And that's the great thing about our budgets. We can move them from year to year. They're not lost. It's not a use it or lose it budget. We can keep some reserves for planned expenditure beyond budget should we wish. But for various reasons, we were unable to hold any regional events. So those are the two big variances to budget that we saw in 1920. Now, as Jane has said, we traditionally just roll the budget forward, and a large component part for this current year has been around committee expenses. But as we've seen, working digitally and remotely, we're not going to be spending anything like that money at all. So we've just started to think about how we can repurpose some of this. And as you can see, we've taken money out of the annual conference because this is digital and remote. We've just had a nominal figure put in committee expenses, and we're putting more money into the website and digital engagement activities, and also some supportive development project money for training, network development, and other innovative practices that we can share with our wider community. So that's how we would imagine the 2021 budget looking for the remainder of this particular year. And then just looking ahead, that's taking account of the fact that we hope to be going to a bit more of a face-to-face way of working in future years, but increasingly investing in some of the website and digital engagement activities, something that we plan to do in future years as well, beefing that up. The reason why we have a large conference budget in 2022-23 is that we hope to be able to take the CAG annual general meeting and conference to Ireland, but this is all still under consideration. So hopefully that gives you a sense of how we want to change the way we spend our money and focus a lot more on the digital environment and the initiatives that Jane's mentioned.
Right, I've come back. I must have lent on something as well. So yeah, I think I need to share my slides again with you just for the election of the committee, and then we would have concluded the AGM. Anyway, I won't waste time by trying to sort that out. So yes, election of the committee. The following people, officers and members of the committee are standing for re-election, and I propose that we take the election as a group. So are there any objections? This is where everybody's still on mute and we have no objection. I think we could say the committee is re-elected. So I'd like to thank everybody for agreeing to serve, and you are now duly re-elected. And I look forward to working with you all over the forthcoming year. So just before we conclude the AGM, I'd just like to say, if you're not currently a member of Community Archives and Heritage Group, then please do consider joining. Sign up is free. You can register on our website, and you'll then be able to add an archive to the directory or add an event and receive our regular e-newsletter. Contact details have been put into the Padlet. Okay, so that is now the end of the AGM. And I think now I have the great pleasure of introducing our speakers for the keynote address. And Andrew is going to facilitate the Q&A and also, comments throughout this session. So Andrew, do we want to go to the first slide while I...
Well, are you going to do the formal introductions? Yeah, I'll bring the slides up.
Okay, so I'll start with the introduction and you're the other side. Okay.
Might be worth just saying before that if people have questions during the presentations, then if they put them in the chat or just indicate that they want to ask a question at the end, then I'll be moderating the chat and I will either read their question out or bring them in.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm delighted to introduce our speakers for the keynote address. This is a co-presentation by Liz Ellis from the National Lottery Heritage Fund and Laura Drysdale with Richard Johnson from the mental health and heritage charity, the Restoration Trust. Liz is Policy Project Manager at the National Heritage Lottery Fund, and her work includes promoting inclusion and well-being through active collaboration with UK-wide communities and stakeholders. She has a background in both heritage and the health sector and is a member of the Wellcome Trust Diversity and Inclusion Steering Group. Laura Drysdale has been running the Restoration Trust since 2014, co-producing partnership projects using heritage and culture for mental health. The small charity has a national reputation for engaging people who are seldom seen in heritage places. Laura has worked in museums and heritage until she changed track and became a mental health support worker. She is a member of this year's Wellcome Trust Ideas Hub cohort and a National Lottery Awards 2020 nominee. Richard Johnson is currently research coordinator for Dr. Hill's Casebook, a project about history, mental health and creativity. The project is a successor to the Changing Mind programme, held at the Norfolk Record Office. Richard's experience is both in the army and within the law profession. And so without further ado, I'll now just hand over to our speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jane and Andrew, Alan, and to everyone for making time this afternoon. So I'm Liz. I'm going to begin our co-presentation, and then I will be handing to Laura and then to Richard. So I will come back to the image that opens our slide presentation a little bit later on. It's from our shared cultural heritage, a brilliant archives project that's taking place at the moment. But for now, if I could move to the second slide, please. So I thought I'd just give the context for the National Lottery Heritage Fund. Forgive me if many of you are familiar with this, but just so everyone knows, I know we've got a wide range of people involved in this event today. So we use lottery players' money to lead UK heritage investment, and our aims throughout this funding framework are to inspire, lead and resource UK heritage, creating positive and lasting change for people and communities now and the future. And as we all know, we've been experiencing really challenging times together, but it's such a pleasure to be able to be with you today. I think how we think about heritage, well-being and belonging is so crucial at this time. So if I could have the next slide, please. So we take a really, at the National Lottery Heritage Fund, we take a really, really broad view to heritage and the whole range of what heritage means for all of us is in this list below. And of course, for the purposes of today, we'll think specifically around the role of communities and archives. Next slide, please. So we're really proud to fund a very wide range of heritage and organisations, and I'm going to just show a slide about our outcomes, which again some of you will be really familiar with, but in the context of this afternoon I wanted to highlight our outcomes. So the next slide, please. So our one mandatory outcome is that a wider range of people will be involved in heritage. And I think all of us involved in this call today will absolutely share values around how community archives and heritage more broadly can belong to all of us. And I've just highlighted another outcome, which is a new outcome for us in this funding framework. And I'm really proud to lead both the inclusion and the wellbeing policy outcomes. So people will have greater wellbeing is a new outcome for us during this funding framework, which runs till 2024. I'm not going to go through all the outcomes. We've got, not a lot of time and some really exciting things to share with you. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So if you're thinking about funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, do take a look at our website. I've touched on the mandatory inclusion outcome to involve as wide a range of people as possible in heritage, but also thinking about the aims of Community Archives and Heritage Group, thinking about removing barriers, introducing new audiences, enabling people to tell their own stories, and then sharing experience, increasing confidence, gaining new insights. That's something that I think all of us involved in this webinar today share as priorities. So very much core to our funding. Next slide, please. So when we talk about inclusion, this is the range. It's not a definitive list, but some of the kinds of activity that we support. So we know that the UK is a really unequal place, and how we diversify the heritage sector, how we think about job opportunities, training, how we can support organisations and individuals in making reasonable adjustments. Also, taking artefacts out more widely. This is something that we'll hear so much more about directly from Laura and Richard in a minute. But in terms of our funding, we're also really interested in governance. So just touching on the ambition of Community Archives and Heritage Group to diversify some of the governance within your group. And then another way we're very keen to support a wider inclusion in heritage is thinking about co-curation and advisory groups. So how do we listen and learn from each other? I understand inclusion as a constant process. We all gain from learning more about each other and listening to different experiences if we're really going to make heritage across the UK a more inclusive place. So that's just a flavour of some of the focus on inclusion that we're proud to support. I'll move to the next slide, please. So just to come back to that mandatory outcome, and when we talk about a wider range of people being involved in heritage, this is Clifton and Abdullah, two young learning disabled men who are sharing at a young people's led event we co-organised a few years ago about the role of young learning disabled people in leadership. And Clifton and Abdullah are sharing an experience they had of mentor and mentee, and as young learning disabled people, very keen to lead and support, and how that kind of experience and confidence then led them to share some of their skills in special schools, that kind of skill and ability working with other young learning disabled people. So when we're thinking about inclusion, thinking about the kind of change that we want to make in heritage, who heritage belongs to, just thinking about the theme of today and the sense of belonging. Next slide, please. So the very first slide, I touched on a current project that's taking place across the UK. It's a partnership project between UK Youth, Manchester Museum, Glasgow Life, and other colleagues, our shared cultural heritage. And it's a 3-year partnership. And this is Dr. Sadia Habib and some of the young women involved in the project. And I think this aspect of heritage and belonging is one of the reasons I really wanted to share this current work with you. Next slide, please. So this particular project brings together a real range of partners and organisations with an express aim of becoming better places for young people to explore identity and connect with others. And in particular, an emphasis on museums and heritage organisations really thinking together about South Asian heritage, the role and opportunities for young people, including new routes into careers. And then the final point I've emphasised in relation to our work together this afternoon, how youth communities, through sharing histories, can have new experiences to explore belonging and identity. And there's a link on the slide. We recently did a piece on our website in linking with South Asian History Month. So you can find out more both on our website, but also through looking at our shared cultural heritage links and websites. There's some really fantastic resources some of the young people are putting together, whether it's anti-racist book lists, sharing their experience of taking part in the project, lots of all-round shared learning for all of us who are involved in this learning, in this work together, in this partnership. If we can have the next slide, please. And just thinking about this other new outcome for us, the role of wellbeing. So just to reiterate, as a funder, we recognise how unequal heritage access is across the UK. And this has particular impacts for people who are disabled, LGBT communities, people on low incomes, people who are Black, Asian, belonging to some minority ethnic communities. There is kind of well-researched data around the levels of lower well-being for some of these communities. And that can also, as we're seeing with the effect of the pandemic, also represent further barriers in terms of equal participation. So I'm going to touch a little bit on how we work in partnership with other organisations to think about making an impact on inequalities, in particular in thinking about wellbeing this afternoon. So we work closely with What Works Centre for Wellbeing. And if any of you are new to What Works Centre for Wellbeing, I really recommend them. There's so much available online, free resources, but also how we listen, how we learn, how we collaborate. Some of you might be familiar with the work of the Culture, Health, Wellbeing Alliance. The National Lottery Heritage Fund are really proud to be strategic partners with them. And for me, this opportunity today to work closely with Laura and Richard from the Restoration Trust is a great example of this really crucial collaboration and how, as a funder, we can listen and learn from the experience of the Restoration Trust. If we can have the next slide, please. So just to put a little bit more detail, all the information I'm sharing is on our website, but what we mean in terms of having greater well-being, the role of connection. So I know this is something that Laura and Richard will touch on when they share their work, but it's never been more important how we connect with each other. And there's clear research linking the roles of social connection around improved well-being. So for our funding, thinking about how the project is designed to impact on well-being, and of course, again, an opportunity to work in partnership with other organisations who are thinking about the impact and role of well-being all the time. Next slide, please. So, as I touched on at the beginning, our definition of heritage is deliberately very, very broad. So many of us through these months will have experienced how important it is to be able to be outside, to enjoy outdoor areas, the opportunities to volunteer, build and share digital skills. There's so many ways that we can support improved well-being. But I think also evaluating how we know the difference we want to make and how we track that and measure that is something that many of us are thinking about. And when we move to some of the resources that are available through What Works Centre for Wellbeing or other partners, this is really useful to know that there are many organisations doing work on measuring and evaluation. Next slide, please. So this is one example from What Works Centre for Wellbeing, where the researchers have brought together a number of documents and reports, and some of the findings demonstrate the positive effect that heritage can have on a sense of belonging, on local pride, on our social connections, on self-confidence, on empowerment, on positive emotions, and in our experience of skills and learning. So this research is available for free on the What Works Centre for Wellbeing. But in a minute, Laura and Richard will really share with you in a vivid way what some of those outcomes and effects really are, and the experience of taking part in some fantastic projects the Restoration Trust lead. Next slide, please. So just before I hand over to Laura and Richard, I just wanted to share with you some work we did with Ingrid Abrishira, who's the Wellbeing and Civil Society lead, over the summer. So Heritage Fund staff were really busy delivering emergency funding support, currently work with DEFRA on the Green Recovery Challenge. And I was keen that staff had up-to-date information around the disproportionate impact that the pandemic has been having on different communities across the UK. So I asked Ingrid to lead a session for staff to remind us all again just how crucial the role of well-being within heritage is for all of us. And Ingrid was pointing out again, she was reminding us the social connections, how crucial these are for us all. And I know when Laura and Richard speak, they'll touch on kind of what's been able to been maintained when physically it's been hard to get together. And I think that's something really interesting when you're thinking in your work ahead around digital connections. So we know through evidence over these last 6 months, a whole range of heritage groups and organisations have been really creative in how those connections can be maintained, even if we can't physically be together. But another really interesting area of heritage, which again, there's kind of great research emerging, is around the shared narratives of trust and belonging, which are really important to all of us in how we feel good about ourselves. So there's not time this afternoon to go into some of the research about what happens when we don't trust each other. But I think many of us will be aware that whether it's through the experience of the pandemic or existing conflicts around Brexit or many other areas across the UK, how we feel a sense of belonging and how heritage can help us with that is so important. And Ingrid was reminding us how special people feel when we interact with physical heritage assets. So whether we're in an environment, in a site, whether we're touching, that very special aspect of heritage, which of course so many of you involved in community archives know so much about, that's so familiar to you. And I think finally, Ingrid was reminding us about how across the whole heritage sector, across the UK and all the work you're all involved in, the kind of skills and experiences you have in bringing people together to explore different histories. And we know that heritage is not neutral, it's not cozy. There are areas that are really difficult, painful, uncomfortable, conflicted, contested to explore. But having this opportunity to connect with each other and begin to have some conversations. So whether it's in our shared cultural heritage in the current Manchester Museum UK Youth Project I touched on, or whether it's in the work that the Restoration Trust is leading, this opportunity to explore different histories in building our sense of belonging, I believe is such an important theme, and it'll be really useful to discuss with you all later. So I'm going to hand on now. I think next slide, please. So I'll hand over to Laura and then on to Richard, and look forward to catching up with everybody later for the discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Liz. So I'm all right, am I? You can all hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Thanks, Laura.
So I'm in front of a digital reconstruction of St Andrew's Hospital, which is the asylum that I'm going to be focusing on today. But what I'd like to do is speak to you about our work, and then my colleague Richard is going to talk specifically about Dr. Hill's casebook and his experience. So it's lovely for me to speak to an organisation whose title embodies the things we care about, which is community, archives, heritage and groups. So I'll come back to that. I'm the director of the Restoration Trust, and we're a charity that involves people with serious mental health challenges in heritage and creativity to make all our lives better. And Andrew's put a lot of links on the Padlet, so please go there if you'd like to find out more about us and about Change Minds. Change Minds is a partnership with Norfolk Record Office that we've been running since 2015. And it matches the Restoration Trust's principles. So all the members have serious mental health challenges. Our partners are members and heritage and health organisations. Group work's at the heart of what we do, and we believe in sustained and regular involvement and safe practice. It's crucial to us that we use real heritage. Liz was talking before about the physical assets, and I think they are really important, but also real expertise and real creativity. So we measure impact and outcomes, and we also tell our stories at places like this and in other media. And then we try to make sure that there's as much learning as possible for everyone involved, partners, staff and volunteers. And we like progression for our members as well. So we try and support people to go on to do whatever it is that they're interested in doing. So Change Minds uses 19th century asylum records for learning and imagination. And over 12 or slightly more sometimes sessions, people choose a patient to research in the casebooks, and then they track their lives and explore the experience imaginatively, and they create some kind of public sharing like an exhibition or a play. We've had 5 iterations in Norfolk, including Dr. Hill's casebook, and around 50 people have taken part. Research indicates that most people find that it has improved their mental health, including longer term. During COVID, Bethlehem Museum of the Mind has piloted an online version, which you can see on their website. It's on the, I've put a link on the Padlet there. And we're developing a UK-wide programme through the Archives for Wellbeing network, which is funded by the National Archives. So if enough people take part in the programme, we'll get robust wellbeing data so that Change Minds could be prescribed as a mental health intervention. Like many of our culture and health colleagues, we've adapted with sessions on Zoom and outdoors, using film, sending things in the post and getting people online. So we're really lucky that we work with Gary Tewson, who's Norfolk County Archivist. And I'll tell you how that happened. In life, you need people who say yes. In 2014, I was working with people who had serious mental health challenges. And I noticed that many clients had interests that services ignored because the services were preoccupied with people's basic needs. But actually, conversation about family history or knitting or motorbikes, whatever really, made a relationship. And without that relationship, you couldn't help with the basics. So an idea emerged, and I can't remember where from, about clients recording oral histories about their experience of the mental health system. So it was something interesting to do, a way to affirm people's right to a voice and a contribution to the future. So I met Gary, and he immediately suggested using Norfolk Record Office's collection of St Andrew's Hospital records as a way to link people's contemporary experiences at the sharp end with local history. So my then employer, Together for Mental Wellbeing, joined the partnership. We were lucky too, it was the zeitgeist that the Heritage Fund was being proactive about social justice and well-being. And they funded our first 2 Norfolk projects and now Dr. Hill's casebook. So along with our members, partners, staff, artists, researchers and funders, we wove this Change Minds web. Archives are an incredibly rich resource for wellbeing. They're largely free to use. They're often publicly owned. They're available everywhere, physically and online. They've got a culture of accessibility, so they're inherently inclusive. Record offices, once initial barriers have been lowered, are safe places. They're orderly and comfortable. Having essentially the same records in different places as with asylum records means you can scale up. So a project like Change Minds can be rolled out elsewhere, and that's sustainable and cost effective. Digitization and family history websites are a vital layer of usability. I think we've all noticed actually over COVID that it's brought even more to the fore that digital exclusion is a real threat to well-being. And we found that the urge to discover information encourages people to overcome their fear of online space. Well, and as for archivists, let's just say that I'm a huge fan. Asylum records are powerful. Many have admission and discharge photographs, but even without the photographs, they compel empathy, especially when they echo personal experience. Research is frustrating. You can find out a lot about a person who, like you, for example, lived in Norfolk, had 2 children, were a fringe, and had postnatal depression. But there's always going to be a gap, information you can't find, or the trail runs out. So you have connected with someone across time, and you have evidence to keep you in touch with reality. But the rest you must imagine. And you can imagine because you're connected. So we're in the realm of object relations, the place that psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott called potential space. And that's a place of playfulness and curiosity where frustration can be tolerated and thought can thrive. Now, people with serious mental illness suffer an attack on this space. It gets filled up by rumination or psychosis, or it gets shut down by depression's bleakness. And it makes real and metaphorical space treacherous so that it can't be crossed to connect with others. Without space to think or to act, nothing creative can happen, and there can't be any imagination or any relating. So the space that we explore in Change Minds is not some airy-fairy flight of fancy. It's an essential part of being human and of connecting. So connection, belonging, community, groups, we're in the territory of our conversation today. My heart lifted at our expert advisory board meeting last week when someone described one of our projects as a community. People who come on our projects are often members of a kind of anti-community of those who struggle to belong, and that can really damage your health. So one Change Minds member didn't speak to anyone she knew from when sessions stopped before Christmas in mid-December until they started again in mid-January. And you have to be strong to survive that. People may have lived in malign communities, such as an abusive family. So in evaluation, one person on our Human Henge project at Stonehenge said, you can get trapped in making the world so small and protecting yourself from the world. But she went on more hopefully, some things you don't need protecting from. Sometimes I think it's just slowly breaking down barriers. And this is a start, you know, within these groups. So we've arrived at groups. There's a red thread that runs from the therapeutic optimism that persisted in some late 19th century asylums through the wartime Northfield experiments and forward to the Restoration Trust. Northfield Hospital in Birmingham was a Second World War military hospital converted from an annex to Rubery Lunatic Asylum. And the experiments were the basis for group psychotherapy and led to the therapeutic community movement. Some communities encompassed whole hospitals. For example, under medical superintendent David Clarke at Fulbourn Hospital in Cambridge from 1953. And David Clarke actually sounds quite like Dr. Hills, of whom you'll hear from Richard. In the early 1990s, Barbara Taylor left Free and Barnet, which had been called Colney Hatch, There's a huge asylum in North London. And when Barbara Taylor left, it was closing. She was discharged to a day hospital run on therapeutic community lines, and she writes about it in her wonderful book, The Last Asylum. Well, most day hospitals have gone now, but one of our members described the Restoration Trust's role as providing the day hospitals of the future. So perhaps we might go the whole hog and call them day asylums, but somehow I don't think that's going to catch on. Once people can feel safe enough to be members of a group with all the risks of love and loss that entails, they are a community. And when you add to that the confidence to move fluidly across time, deploying new skills, people are set up to connect with other benign communities that they can contribute to and draw on. So I hope that we are a kind of therapeutic community. So we're in hard times. There are so many forces driving us apart, and we need to use all our resources, including heritage, to bring us together. It's our common duty. Dear community archive activists, I don't need to tell you that archives are amazing, but why are they so absent from the conversation about culture, health and well-being? Our evaluation consultant on Dr. Hill's casebook, Professor Karen McArdle, couldn't find a single publication in her literature search that explicitly evidenced the use of archives for health and well-being, although we know there are so many good projects out there. So we need more projects and significant evidence to make the case that excellent, careful, fascinating experiences of archives result in deep inclusion and better mental health. And so that's my call to action. Thank you very much.
Right, thanks, Laura. Good afternoon. My name is Richard Johnson, and I'm the research coordinator for Dr. Hill's casebook. Dr. Hill's casebook follows on from the series of Change Minds projects, projects which are specifically targeted at participants with mental ill health. Change Minds itself examines the patient records from the 19th century casebooks of the Norfolk Lunatic Asylum held at the Norfolk Record Office. Each patient is studied in detail, their genealogical information is researched, and the comparison between then and now is examined. The participants are encouraged to create their own response, whether it's a formal biography, stories, poetry, or other artwork. I joined Change Minds in 2018 as a participant, having had successful periods of mental illness. I've always had a strong interest in history, so this project was just nuts to me. I started with a preconceived image of Victorian asylums as joyless, repressive, nothing short of being prisons for the mentally ill. How wrong I was. We're fortunate in Norfolk that we have such a large collection of asylum records, both in volume and variety. The jewels in the crown are the patient casebooks and the journals of Dr. William Hills, the medical superintendent of the asylum from 1861 to 1887. My first reading of Dr. Hill's journal was like the metaphorical bolt of lightning. He wrote with such good humour, and further digging revealed a man of genuine concern for his patients, hardworking and basically possessed of a very real humanity. John Connolly, the proponent of non-restraint in lunatic asylums and himself a medical superintendent, wrote in 1847, "The medical superintendent will almost regard his patients as his children, and humanly speaking, his whole heart will be given to them." That's Dr. Hills. From his medical training at Guy's Hospital, his period at the Surrey Dispensary, and 33 years in pauper asylums, Dr. Hills devoted his life to the medical care of the poor when other more prominent practitioners were quick to seek the money and fame of private practice. Dr. Hills was certainly not lacking in ability. After qualifying as both a surgeon and a doctor of medicine, he was appointed medical superintendent at the Norfolk Asylum in 1861. For over 25 years, he then cared for the patients, managed the staff, and administered the general running of the institution. His journals and his annual reports demonstrate his personal ethos and the heavy burden of responsibility of caring for over 700 patients with only one or two other medical assistants. For over 2 years, my world has consisted of Dr. Hills and the patients and the staff of the asylum. I've laughed with them, cried with them, and rejoiced at their successes, their family and friends. It was with surprise, but not a little personal satisfaction, that Laura Drysdale of the Restoration Trust proposed a project to be based upon my research of Dr. Hills and the asylum, Dr. Hills Casebook. Dr. Hill's casebook uses the same principles behind Change Minds, but with the specific aim of producing a piece of community theatre about life at the asylum during Dr. Hill's leadership. As historical advisor, I was a little wary of that. I saw Dr. Hills meets the Wizard of Oz, but I needn't have worried. The engagement and enthusiasm of the research participants and the combination of the theatre element have been spectacular and has fulfilled my wildest dream of bringing Dr. Hills to the knowledge of a wider public. Each researcher adds to the project their empathy for people over 100 years ago, the considered examination of the asylum records, and the special contribution that they bring from their own experience of mental ill health. And they keep asking questions, it certainly keeps me on my toes. The beauty of Dr. Hill's casebook is that people who would not otherwise access primary sources, and I include myself in this, are engaging with archival records. Such heritage projects encourage a diversity of views and knowledge, which allows the community as a whole to discover its own history in ways which could not perhaps be achieved through more formal academic channels. It allows the telling of stories of people who are often ignored. It is projects like these that so clearly demonstrate that access to historical sources should never be restricted. The last 2.5 years have been an exhilarating mixture of search and discovery, and the revelation of stories long since hidden, albeit with a tincture of frustration at the unavoidable gaps in the records. It is the general deficiency in the current mental health services, particularly in Norfolk, that cries out for such initiatives as Change Minds and the other projects provided by the Restoration Trust. Without doubt, Change Minds was and is the single most important factor in my journey of recovery. It is no exaggeration to say that it is not only life-changing, but also life-saving. A special thanks, of course, to Laura and the Restoration Trust and to the National Lottery Heritage Fund for having the confidence to finance these projects. But thanks also to Gary Tewson, Norfolk County Archivist, and the staff at the Norfolk Record Office. Gary's enthusiasm, constant good humour and encouragement has been invaluable in these projects, where whose support we could not have achieved our successes, whether on a personal basis, a project level, or in the wider field of community participation. Perfect merger of heritage, well-being and belonging. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. So I think there's lots of really kind of powerful testimony and powerful points to come through there. And I'm going to sort of suggest to people that there's one or two points that we can make up here from the audience in terms of questions. But if there are further questions, people sitting there who haven't written in the chat, then I would like suggest you kind of sort of bring up your camera and maybe you can ask a question. Just while people are thinking about that, then I'll just put one that kind of sort of speaks to some of a question that's come through, but also that I thought of. That Victoria Stevens writes around the tactile access to archive material increases understanding of that material and is its message exponentially, way beyond the written information. And I was also thinking about that when the speakers talked about the kind of special nature of that physical interaction with heritage assets like archives. But I wonder what that means when we're doing a lot of this work digitally and the interaction is digitally. Do we still have that special connection with the material, and how is that connection transformed digitally? That's for any of the speakers.
Can I answer that from in terms of Dr. Hill's casebook? We've had to use digitized records. There isn't any alternative, and that we are where we are. And although we've lost that physical connection, which I don't dispute really matters, what we've gained is a sort of incredible flexibility around using the digitized records and actually around operating online. And that's meant that actually for this project, we've got more people on it than we had on previous projects. Because people have been able to sort of drop in at different times. Richard's been able to do a lot of additional work with people out of, online, if they can't attend a session because, that doesn't fit with their life. Then Richard's been doing work with them one-to-one, and our coordinator, Darren France, has also done that. So we've lost a lot in that, but we've also gained something, perhaps something we didn't expect.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question from Donna Morn, who asks, how do you measure these wellbeing outcomes? And I was thinking about that when you said that the archives, Laura, when you said that archives haven't really been part of any of the evaluations or the literature that you found. And I wonder whether that's something that the sector needs to, well, it is something the sector needs to address. But how do we measure these outcomes?
Well, with our projects, we've used, we initially started with the University of East Anglia and our local mental health trust as part of a research sort of team who worked together to produce measures along with people who, mental health trusts have usually have a group of people called patient public involvement, so people, so you can propose a project which then people who are service users or carers can comment on. So anyway, we had this group, research group, and we used measures, various measures, but the core one, which is useful if you want to go back to health, is the Warwick-Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale. I'm sure some of you will have come across that, and we use the short version. But that gives you quantitative data. But I said that we want to have this big change minds rolling out all over the place, because small numbers aren't going to tell you much, to be honest. You need big numbers to give you meaningful data that's persuasive to health. So we also use qualitative measures, and that's focus groups, questionnaires with a sort of softer series of questions, and staff and volunteer reflective groups. And we're sort of pretty much following that model again now for Dr. Hill's casebook.
That's the official data point of view, but frankly, I'm Exhibit A as regards what he has done for me. As I said, I mean, 2 years, I'm now a research coordinator for my own project, so to speak. So, yeah, I'm here after 2 years, so after 2.5 years, so that's enough for me. It's done wonders for me. I can't speak too highly for it. Forget all the data and the figures and statistics.
That's really powerful, Richard. Thank you so much. And I'm just thinking from a funder's perspective. I'm noticing some of the questions, how do you measure the wellbeing outcomes? And also there's a specific question, Helen Lindsay, thank you for your question about monitoring. And I think for me, that's one of the reasons why I'm so pleased for us to be able to speak together this afternoon, because I think Helen's point is really so important about the ethics of this work. How do we think together in ways that are proportional? So our funding goes from £3,000 up to several million. And I think all the time, my work with Laura and the Restoration Trust, I'm really aware of how incredibly hard everybody works to really listen to what people want out of a project, the kind of flexibility and creativity that goes into that. But also, as Helen points to in her question, I think there are really important ethical questions about how we monitor or report on wellbeing. So as an example, some projects we funded which are either led by youth organisations or have a strong youth partner, there might be existing models of measuring, monitoring aspects of self-confidence or communication or independent travel, that I think all the time it's thinking about what's proportional and really being very conscious of how we work together. So I think that, as Laura points to, you know, there is something really significant about the impact of this work and how together we work to really demonstrate the impact. But I think, you know, myself in a previous role, I was part of a museum project where we used the Warwick Edinburgh Wellbeing Scale, and we started with the long version, and it was exhausting for everybody. And we changed that in order to really respect everybody's energy, but also I think flexibility is something that, you know, I know the Restoration Trust think about so carefully. And as a funder, I'd want to all the time think about what's proportional for the difference you're trying to make. So I don't know, Helen, if you feel that answers your question, but I think it is really important how we think together about impact and measuring the difference we want to make. But you're absolutely right. You know, within all that, we need to think about the ethics, particularly when we might be working with people who, for all sorts of reasons, have actually had a great deal of at times quite intrusive questions into personal lives. And it's not appropriate for the heritage sector to be making those kind of unreasonable demands. It's how we think together about measuring impact.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there one more question that like to come from the audience? Somebody who would and it's just as I speak. So Jessica Clark has written, do you have any particular advice for anybody hoping to start a similar project with wellbeing and archives, or anyone wanting to engage with those with mental health issues?
Shall I start off with that then?
Yep.
Well, it's really encouraging that you asked that question, Jessica, because I feel it's kind of leading on to project to come. So my advice is, if you're coming from the archive end of things, is to find a mental health partner who you can talk to. So that's an organisation that's working already with working with the people who you want to be engaged with, because you can't just sort of advertise for people who've got a mental health problem. You know, doesn't that feel quite weird? And you need to have a level of expertise in your mental health partner. I also think it's about trust, that you're much more likely to get somebody to engage in the project if they're sort of brought by somebody that they already trust. So that would probably be someone like a support worker or their care coordinator, but you can find your mental health partner from somebody. So that's my main piece of advice.
Anybody else want to come in there, please?
I think from a funding point of view, you know, we're so keen to support partnerships across heritage sector and non-heritage sector. So, you know, at the moment, I'm working with colleagues about some content we're developing for Disability History Month that runs from the 18th of November to the 18th of December. And, you know, how in these times, I think more than ever, there is so much wish to work better together. And as a funder, we'd really encourage archives to think about whether it's a partnership with Richmond Fellowship or Mind, or as Laura has suggested, the many other amazing mental health organisations that exist. And that way, all of us learn. I was really struck by that kind of lovely aspect of kind of learning for the whole heritage sector as well as for the participants. That for me kind of sums up, you know, what I was trying to say earlier about inclusion is a process, I think, for all of us, how we talk about our mental health, how we challenge stigma, how we work together. That's such an opportunity. And as a funder, we'd really encourage that kind of cross-sector partnership working. I'll stop there. Thank you.
I know that time is really moving on a little bit here, and I certainly could ask some more questions. But it's been really a fabulous start to our webinar series, and I want to thank all our three speakers really for an exceptional presentation. Before I hand back to Jane, I would suggest maybe we'd turn our mics on and give the usual appreciation that we would in these circumstances, and thank our three speakers very much. Over to you, Jane.
Well, thank you all very much indeed. I mean, that really was excellent. It's very powerful messages from all three speakers. I think there's so much that we can take away from this. And thank you all for contributing to the discussion as well. So we are actually keeping to time, so that's brilliant. And we could take a quick 5-minute break. Is everyone happy with that? I see people nodding. Al's nodding, yes. So let's have a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and see you all for the awards presentation.